Okay, folks, so we are recording now. All right, so tonight we are talking about Delta fish and the Delta Tunnel and some other issues affecting fish, but these are the main topics that we're going to talk about. There's a lot of nuanced fish concerns already. There's already some legal battles out there. There's a lot of different science directions we can take this topic. And if there's anything that people want to know a lot more about, maybe that Deirdre can't answer for us tonight or that I can't answer, we can always do a part 2 to this. So send me your ideas and we'll do a part 2 that covers anything else that we didn't get to today. So just why should you care about this? I mean, hopefully everyone cares about fish just because they are a part of our ecosystem, our universe, they're part of California, and that alone is a reason to care. But if you're not someone who cares too much about fish, and if you're here, you probably do, and you probably care about the environment, just know that salmon and good water quality are key to the health of any ecosystem. And hi, sorry, someone's making some noise. Lionel, can you mute yourself? It's not Lionel. Who is it? Okay, think we're good now. All right, thank you. Salmon, fish, all of our little fishy friends out there, the health of any fish and water quality is the key to health of the entire ecosystem. You know, fish are only one key component to an ecosystem, and it's a key contributing factor to California's native people, to our economies, to our drinking water supplies. And without any immediate action to scale down agricultural water deliveries or to protect rivers and reservoir water supplies, and then of course, stopping the Delta Tunnel from actually being built, the state's going to be complicit in these fish kills and the toxic algal blooms in many of the state's already overdrafted rivers. So this is the health of fish is one key component to a lot of other things going on. All right, so these are two of the main areas that we are going to be thinking about tonight in the Delta region. Some common fish that a lot of times you'll hear us talking about salmon or the Delta smelt because those are the ones that people show a major interest in. But there are a lot of different types of salmon, different types of smelt, and different types of fish out there. So some of the ones that we are going to be talking about in the Trinity River region include the coho salmon, the spring run Chinook salmon, fall run Chinook salmon, steelhead, including winter run and salmon run, the Yulicon, green sturgeon, white sturgeon, Pacific lamprey, American shad, largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted black bass. And all of those little guys are found in the Trinity River region. And then in the Central Valley region over here, Stockton area, those fish that we see commonly are the winter run, spring run, and late fall run Chinook salmon, steelhead, Delta smelt, longfin smelt, green sturgeon, white sturgeon, Pacific lamprey, river lamprey, Kern Brook lamprey, Sacramento hitch, Sacramento splittail, hardhead, Sacramento perch, Central California roach. Ew, it's not a roach, it's a fish. Starry flounder, northern anchovy, striped bass, American shad, threadfin shad, California bay shrimp, and the largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted black bass. So I think that we just don't give all these different fish enough credit for toughing it out in the Delta. And I just wanted to make sure that they actually get their due. So here's some fish vocabulary. I'm going to ask someone to unmute themselves and just read some of this fish vocabulary for us. Cynthia Denny, are you able to? All right.
Can you hear me yet?
Yeah, go ahead.
Anadromous fish are born in fresh water, migrate to the ocean for some amount of time, and return to fresh water to spawn. The best known are the salmon of all kinds and the steelhead, which is, I got to study at one time, it is actually a trout. just like a rainbow trout, but unlike its brothers and sisters, when it spawns, it decides to take the plunge and go out to the ocean. And if it returns, which most don't, they're huge. Semi-anadromous are fish born in freshwater and migrate to low salinity, brackish water as adults. Resident fish do not migrate to the ocean, they remain in freshwater, just like those rainbow trout that never leave the home of the river. Native species originated naturally in a specific location. Non-native species originated somewhere else and were introduced or accidentally introduced.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, an example of that, of the introduced, would be either fish that people throw in as pets in their local river, or, you know, maybe you've got a mussel or something that's stuck to the bottom of a boat from somewhere far away, and now they're all over the place. Mussels are a big problem in the Delta. So thanks for that, Gary. All right, let's look at some migration patterns. Really the only thing I want to say about this map, because it is teeny tiny, I suppose, is that, you know, our salmon and our, this is a migration pattern of Chinook salmon, but the salmon are kind of all over California and right through the Delta. There's really nowhere in the Delta that isn't a part of their migration journey. So whatever happens with the Delta Tunnel and any other major water projects, it is going to impact the salmon. Let's just briefly take a look at this life cycle chart from DWI. I think the only point I want to make about this is that, you know, there are different times of the year when you're going to see different life stages for the Chinook salmon, and the life stages kind of indicate different vulnerabilities in their lives, right? So when they're young, when they're babies, it's harder to fight off predators. They are prey when they're smaller, and it's there's a lot of different things that they have to face when you think about their own life and their size, but then also the temperature in the season and how much water is available. What is the temperature of the water? What does that time of year mean for water quality? So there's a lot of different threats to be thinking about just as life exists for a fish. And then before we even get into the possibility of human-made situations and the Delta Tunnel. So current threats to fish, there are a whole lot of them. We're not going to be able to go over everything, but I did want to talk about a few of them. So stressors, I mean, this summer in particular, there are a lot of fish kills everywhere. There are emergency deadlines that all of our allies are trying really hard to make and to advocate for and to use to protect our fish. And then of course there's dozens of fires out there, and fire obviously isn't helpful for fish or really anyone. Can I get someone else to read this list of stressors out loud? Maybe a woman this time.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Roseanne.
Stressors. Contaminants include pesticides, metals, and pharmaceuticals. Entrainment occurs when fish are transported with water at a diversion point. Habitat quality and quantity. Is there enough good quality habitat for spawning and rearing? Invasive species may include predators and an increased competition for food and habitat. Passage or stranding. Impediments to passage may include dams or delays in migration. Physical harm or not noise, including underwater construction. Predator, bird, and mammals that influence fish behavior, distribution, and abundance. Water temperature affects metabolic function of the fish and can be lethal, as well as acts as indicators of seasonal changes. Water quality includes dissolved oxygen, water clarity, and suspended sediment.
Thanks, Roseanne. That was great. Yeah, it's a hard knock life for fish. So some of the concerns that fish are currently facing outside of the tunnel, the Bureau of Reclamation has really not been following its own temperature management plan regarding releases to the Sacramento River. According to Bill Jennings, who's chairman and executive director of the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, they are one of our allies that we ask for fish advice or, you know, information about fish all the time. And the bottom line really is that we're going to run out of cold water in Lake Shasta, and I mean, really everywhere in the rivers. But Lake Shasta is one of the places we are concerned about. And temperatures are just going to be too warm for salmon to survive. Another dry year or critically dry year is going to take California into uncharted territory. And it feels like every year we say, this is the worst it's ever been. This is brand new territory, but that's really what's happening. I think we've talked several times about how this could be the year that the Delta smell are officially extinct, and the Sacramento splittail and the longfin smell are not far behind, and then salmon maybe a few years after that. So it is very concerning. So let's talk a little bit about curtailment hearings. The Scott and Shasta curtailments will, they're going to the water board this month, and this is the first time that these watersheds, which are major producers of wild coho and Chinook salmon, are facing any curtailments, even though they are nearly or totally dewatered in sections, even in normal water years. A little bit of background information on the Scott River. The Scott River is the top producer of endangered coho salmon in the Klamath River. Both of these rivers feed the Delta, which is why we're discussing them. The Scott River is dewatered by surface water diversions and groundwater pumping in most years. A recent court decision said that groundwater pumping by irrigators is making the Scott River go dry because the river's surface and groundwater are interconnected, and this pumping is a violation of the public's trust, and it should be regulated. California Fish and Wildlife has said that surface water withdrawals that are not scaled to water year type contribute to disconnected flows in the main stem river and tributaries, and they have impeded or prevented migration of coho and Chinook salmon. They have asked for immediate action to protect the flows. Detected benthic toxic algae in the Scott River in 2020 threatens public health and cultural use of the river even to this day. And then a little bit of background on the Shasta River. Nearly all of the cold Shasta River water was adjudicated, which is a process of giving out water, to a handful of landowners in the early to mid 1900s during a time that fish and most people had no rights. The Shasta River, I know some people say Shasta, some say Shasta. I hope I'm not offending anyone. The Shasta River has a natural summertime base flow of about 150 CFS, even in a drought. CFS is cubic feet per second. The river is special because the highest flows happen in the late summer as the glaciers on Mount Shasta begin to melt. If you haven't been to Mount Shasta, it's gorgeous. You should go visit. Oh, and check out Madeline's Cafe. She was my old landlady, and she was a volunteer for Sierra Club. Anyway, the water appears in the valley bottom in larger springs. These springs are almost all on private property, unfortunately, and the flows are deemed owned by water rights holders. So excessive agricultural diversions of the cold water endangered those threatened salmon. Warm, polluted water is returned to the river from irrigated fields. Normally in a late spring, early summer runoff, juvenile salmonids would follow the cold and the high flows all the way out to the ocean. Young first-year coho need to stay in cold fresh water throughout the summer. And then the diversions and bulldozing is really just making this impossible. So they are threatened by a lot of things. These curtailment hearings are happening now, and we could talk a little bit more about that later. But if you want to get involved with that, Save California Salmon is really our biggest ally in anything salmon related. And those are the folks to speak to about these hearings and any other urgent salmon issues. So the dams, the Klamath River dams have now been transferred from Warren Buffett's Pacific Power to the Klamath River Renewal Corporation for the purpose of dam removal. Hooray! The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, is now taking comments for the scoping process under Public Input Laws, NEPA, for an analysis of dam removal. Klamath dam removal has been intensely studied, including through FERC, NEPA, CEQA analysis for over 15 years. Numerous studies and all analyses prove dam removal is safe and it will greatly benefit the salmon, tribes, and water quality without harming water supply for farmers. During these last 15 years, Klamath salmon numbers have declined dramatically and the river has experienced multiple juvenile fish kills. Water quality has declined to the point that it is often not safe to touch it due to the toxic algae. We've seen that in the Stockton area too. Both the fish kills and toxic algae have been linked to the dams. Numerous studies have demonstrated that dam removal would restore river flows, enable salmon to migrate to the upper basin, and would benefit habitat conditions downstream. By improving river conditions and supporting healthy fish populations, dam removal will directly benefit tribal cultures, as well as fishing and food economies throughout the region and state. No farms, ranches, or municipalities would have their water supply impacted by dam removal. Most agricultural water supply comes from Upper Klamath Lake, which is not impacted by dam removal. California and Oregon have already approved dam removal permits, and the costs of dam removal to Pacificor customers of about $200 million that's already been collected. A little quote from one of our biggest allies here, Regina Chichazola. The Klamath Dams were originally scheduled to come out in 2020, but inaction by Pacificor, which is the dam owner, and the federal government has delayed progress in the dam removal process, but we're making progress now. The cultural significance of the spring salmon is beyond your American conception. It's more than just a policy trying to get passed through or a biological opinion. According to Ryan Reed, a Hoopa Valley tribal member of Yurok descent and a Karuk spring salmon ceremonial priest and University of Oregon student. The spring salmon are a relative that is facing extinction and part of our lifestyle, our cultural longevity, and the survival of his people. These aspects, as well as many more, need to be addressed, and it's critical for future generations. A little more about native salmon. So the native salmon runs are facing a lot of danger. They're imperiled. Nearly all young Sacramento River winter Chinook salmon could perish this year due to the drought and diversions from the Delta region to Delta water agencies and Big Ag. Yesterday's decision from Newsom to reduce flows to Central Valley Farms, that could provide some relief, of course, but it's probably too late for many fish. I mean, especially the ones that have already been dying off in these fish kills. And I think right now, maybe it's a little too early to see exactly how impactful the decision will be for the rest of the year, how many fish will be saved, how many fish are still going to die anyway, due to the diversions that we've already had this year. Maybe some fish expert here can make some predictions, hint, hint, Deirdre. We'll get to that at the end. So to save even some of the Sacramento River salmon population in a year where pumping water to farms has resulted in dangerously low water flows, California has had to resort to hauling millions of young fish raised in state-run hatcheries via tanker trucks to the Golden Gate. But trucking fish is a desperate measure, and it conceals like a larger crisis. It's really just a Band-Aid solution. And it's likely to make the fate of fish one of the biggest political issues, given the recall and the drought and everything else. And the salmon are really an indicator of how healthy our world is. That's a direct quote by Chief Kayleen Sisk, leader of Winnemem Wintu tribe, who we try to look to for guidance on all things salmon and fish. So let's just quickly talk a bit about the Butte Creek. I was wondering if Dan Bacher would be on tonight, but shout out to him for his reporting on Butte Creek, and he's one of the biggest, he's our volunteer and one of the biggest followers of the Butte Creek situation. So the majority of Butte Creek spring run Chinook salmon listed under the state and federal Endangered Species Acts have died before spawning due to an outbreak of disease in low warm water conditions. As of July 27th, so that was a week ago, over 12,000 spring Chinook salmon have died of disease in low warm water conditions before spawning, according to the latest CDFW, Center for Disease, Fish and Wildlife Snorkel Survey update. This was the second largest run of spring Chinook on record, over 18,000 fish, according to them, and their estimates, they estimate even higher number of 25,000 spring Chinook returned to spawn in Butte Creek this year. PG&E, Governor Newsom, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Water Board have really not done enough to stop this disaster. They're kind of overseeing the extinction of endangered winter run Chinook salmon on the Sacramento River, and now they're seeing the extinction of the wild run of salmon in Butte Creek as well. Tens of millions of dollars have been invested in Butte Creek. And but now that these water diversions are largely going uncontrolled, often for rice subsidence, and for PG&E not really releasing enough cold water when it's needed, Butte Creek is experiencing one of the largest adult fish kills of an endangered fish that the state has ever seen. So let's talk a little bit more about that disease I just mentioned. The disease-causing parasite, Nova Shasta. So Karuk tribe's fish monitoring efforts currently detect a greater than 95% prevalence of infection among Chinook and coho salmon. So that's obviously horrible. In a statement on June 1st, the tribe said that hydrological conditions in the Klamath River Basin are the worst in modern history. Although in recent years, this has really become an all too common refrain. This is something we're saying all the time. Ecosystems and economies all along the California and Oregon border are strained to the breaking point. Massive fish kills currently underway in the Klamath River that could result in losing an entire generation of salmon. Their monitoring traps are full of dead juvenile salmon for the Karuk tribe. The few fish still alive are infected with disease, and it's really a catastrophic blow to the fishery and Karuk culture. The tribe pointed out that the parasite Nova Shasta has been linked to Klamath salmon declines for decades, so this is not something that's new. The tribe attributed the proliferation of the disease to low and warm water conditions caused by both the presence of 4 Pacific dams on the Klamath River and the Bureau of Reclamation's management of the river. You've probably heard me talk before about how low amounts of water or low water flows or reduced water flows, and then warm water conditions are our biggest concerns when it comes to the Delta Tunnel and fish. You know, if the Delta Tunnel were to take away water, that's automatically going to reduce the flows, which means there's less water for the fish to swim through, but then having less water means that water with the surface area is then going to be hotter. So those two things we're already seeing is this biggest indicator of the spread for this parasite, and the biggest reason of the fish kill here. That's why we're warning about the Delta Tunnel. And we can't even imagine what kind of damage this would do over here. So a complex of dams in the mid-Klamath disrupt natural flow patterns, and then they cause warmer than normal water temperatures. So that really creates an ideal habitat for parasites to just flourish. I think we've all seen that when you've got a little puddle in your yard and mosquitoes just get out of control. Same kind of principle. These dams really don't control how much water is in the Klamath River. That's more a function of how the Bureau of Reclamation manages their irrigation diversions from the upper Klamath Lake in Oregon, about 50 miles upstream from where this is happening. So let's get back to the Delta Tunnel and DWR and what we started to learn from last night, which I want to stress is really just the very beginning of what we're starting to learn with this round of the Delta Tunnel. You know, they did chunks of impact reports, some impact reports they finished, some they didn't over the years for the different versions of the Delta Tunnel. But right now, or last night, they were speaking to the things that they're looking at and going to be looking at in their environmental impact report, which again won't be ready until the middle of next year. And that's when we have our next big vote. That's when we're going to take, just as a refresher, that's when we're going to take this environmental impact report to the water agencies or the state water contractors north and south of the Delta, like Met, who we're talking about all the time, or like SFPUC, like Santa Clara Valley. Those are the folks we're going to say, hey, this is the environmental impact report. This is what it's saying about what the Delta Tunnel is going to do and how it's going to concern fish. So right now, they're just trying to figure out the types of things they're going to study. I think one of our biggest concerns has been, okay, well, the thresholds and regulations change all the time. Are you going to pick a point in time and say, okay, well, in 2019, this was the law, so that's what we're going to do? For the most part, it seems like they will stay up to date as regulations and laws change. But that will probably also be something that we have to stay on top of them for. and just say, hey, the law has changed. It's gotten stricter. You need to take care of these protections a little more stringently. So as they begin their studies, they are going to be looking for the species that are going to be included are going to be selected for analysis based on the importance of the fish species, their vulnerability, their potential to be affected by construction activities, and the changes in the State Water Project and Central Valley Project operations implemented under the project alternatives. For the management concern, those species are listed by state or federal agencies as endangered or threatened, as well as species of tribal, commercial, or recreational importance. So again, that's why it's one more reason why it's so critically important that we have tribes engaged, involved in this process, and that DWR and the water agencies are reaching out to to tribes, because we need to know which fish species are critically important to tribes and that the DWR and agencies should be protecting, right? So species of special concern are identified by California Department of Fish and Wildlife as critical, high, or moderate. So any of those types of fish that I just listed are going to be included in the studies. And then the study areas, the regions that they're looking at are the Trinity River Basin, including the Trinity and Lewiston reservoirs, the lower Klamath River, the Delta and Suisun Bay Marsh, San Pablo and San Francisco Bays, upstream of Delta, the Sacramento River, including Shasta and Keswick reservoirs, Whiskeytown Reservoir and Clear Creek, Feather River, including Oroville Reservoir and Thermalito After Bay, American River and Folsom Lake, Stanislaus River and New Malone's, sorry if I butchered that, reservoir, San Joaquin River and Millerton Reservoir, and then all of the State Water Project and Central Valley Project export service areas. So this is just a little bit about what the Delta Conveyance Project, we say tunnel, they say conveyance project, it's all the same thing. Their modeling framework looks like in terms of things that affect fish, the factors and variables affecting fish, just a little bit of technical mumbo jumbo. I wanted to say that the thresholds of significance that they're going to be looking at are, so anything that they're concerned about when they study the fish would include substantially reducing the habitat of fish or aquatic species, which I think that we have seen, yes, it's important. And actually it was Arthur Feinstein who last night, he was from, I think, Golden Gate. He said, look, we've sued the crap out of you guys since the 90s, and we know that habitat is only one piece of it. We all know that the flows are the biggest indicator of fish and especially salmon health. I think that's something that we've been saying for a while now. And yes, habitat is important, but we can't just let them say, oh, well, the habitat is nice, there's plenty of rice and whatever here. It's the flows, and that's something that we will have to keep reiterating as we fight off the Delta Tunnel, that the flows are kind of the biggest indicator there. But, so important that they're looking at the habitat of fish and aquatic species, so not just fish, but also all little critters that like water. Anything that's they're also going to continue looking at anything that's causing fish or aquatic species populations to drop below self-sustaining levels. Obviously, that's not good. Any threats to eliminate a fish or aquatic species community. So any regional things that's going to affect them. Anything that's going to have a significant impact either directly or through habitat modifications on any fish or aquatic species identified as a candidate, as sensitive or special status species in local or regional plans, policies, regulations, in a bunch of different agencies. And then anything that's going to have a significant impact on any sensitive aquatic natural community identified in local regional plans. And then anything that's going to interfere substantially with movement of any native, resident, or migratory fish or aquatic species. So we'll talk just briefly about the water pumps and their screens and what that means for fish. So you are looking at a cylindrical T facility or a T screen. It's basically the best that I can explain it. this is kind of where the fish would like swim up to right here, these screens, and be like, oh no, I can't keep going. I gotta stop. And then these are the cylindrical pumps that are kind of moving the water along. And when they were looking at the different types of pumping systems and everything else, they compared cylindrical. Sorry, Stephen, can you just mute yourself, please?
Sorry.
Thanks. So they were looking at cylindrical T-screens or vertical flat plate screens. Economically, it comes out to about the same because they're different sizes, but for the smaller ones, they would need more. So they are ultimately going with the cylindrical T-screen as most likely as their choice because it has a shorter structure, which means reduced footprint and impacts. It's going to fit better in the rivers. It's a little cheaper in terms of the shorter structure. It's got better flow control. It has individual screen unit control, so they can kind of look at like the individual chunks of this thing rather than the whole entire system. It's got better screen cleaning, so less hot spots. And to clean these kinds of things, it's basically like a giant toothbrush that's rotating on a little motor. And the motors themselves have a horsepower of about 10. So it's not this insanely powerful machine just to clean it. They've got better biofouling performance. They're a little bit, well, yeah, they're less noisy compared to vertical flat plate screens. They have easier operations and maintenance. So it's a less complex system to clean them in the first place. The screen units are pretty heavy, so they're not going to just float away. They've got more motors and no sediment jetting. And then the T-sections protrude into the river, but that does mean they possibly would have more debris collection and potential for damage. And then the refugia does not add link. We'll talk about refugia more a bit later. So their recommendation was to choose the cylindrical T-screens because of the shorter in-river diversion structure, the better screen cleaning with less operations and maintenance, the better flow control over a full range of diversion flows, no noise. I mean, there's probably some noise, but they said it's less than 1 decibel, so we'll call it no noise. And then an excellent track record. And that's no noise underwater. Above water, they said it might be an issue for anyone who lives like right there next to it. Hopefully they're not going to put it right next to someone's house, but they said a little further down the river, you're not going to, allegedly not going to hear anything. So some folks did raise some questions about that, are they really truly going to be the same, but in terms of cost, and is it definitely the most cost effective choice here? As a Southern Californian, yes, I care about cost, but as an environmentalist, I mostly care about the environmental impact. But they said that because the structure is shorter, that's one of the ways that they're going to keep it a little cheaper. And then the only alternatives are really considering the different size intakes, and that it would be about, so because the size of the structures might differ, it could be a 500 CFS intake screen for vertical, but then with a T screen, it would be 100 CFS, and they would just need 5 of those to kind of, get the same impact as the 500 CFS one, if that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about preliminary bypass flow criteria. So bypass flow is the flow remaining in the Sacramento River downstream of the proposed North Delta diversion intakes, and it's sufficient to minimize upstream tidal transport at 2 points of control, which would be the Sutter Slough and the Georgiana Slough, both on the Sacramento River. The percent of flow that could be diverted at new intakes increases as Sacramento River flow increases. So the more water flowing through, the more water they're going to take, unfortunately, but it also means the vice versa, the less water. So what you're looking at is kind of the levels that change based on seasonal hydrology, in drier parts of the year, the summer. Depends on where you are in the river, but in the drier parts of the year, there's going to be less water. And then as snowpack melts, at least for now, who knows if we'll have snow by the time they actually build this thing, And then the other like short bursts from storms and precipitation, they would have more. So I think the one big thing that we can continue to discuss and that we will definitely have to bring up probably in the follow-up comments to these webinars, and then definitely next year, I think we will have to keep reiterating that when they say, okay, there's, less than 5,000 CFS of water flowing through the river right now because it's super dry, it's a dry year, that means they should not be, they shouldn't be pumping any water through the tunnel. And they said that it's no pumping, but that no could mean roughly zero, which means it could mean very small amounts. And I think that we're going to have to get them to really clarify what that means for all the regulatory agencies and really say, hey, no means no. If there's not enough water running through the river, you cannot be diverting any of this through the tunnel. That will probably be something we're going to have to reiterate over and over just based on the things I heard last night. So it's a little suspicious, a little shady, but we'll see. So what does this mean by preliminary bypass and when is it preliminary? Here they're saying that preliminary really means through the development of the CEQA document and then the application of this document. So through the reports for the environmental impact report, that's when they're considering it preliminary. I suppose that means that when it comes time for permitting, they would reevaluate what this bypass flow criteria is. And then if they were to actually build this tunnel, which we're not going to let happen, what would that mean? Would they have to reevaluate it? Because remember, all these things take time. They wouldn't start building until 2024. They wouldn't finish building until 2040. So will there even be any water left at that point? I think those things will have to be constantly, we'll have to keep looking at those, us as Sierra Club folks, and then also all water regulatory agencies. So the rates of allowed diversion, are those average? Are those daily? Are those spontaneous? It kind of really depends, or according to them, according to DWR, it kind of really depends. Bless you, whoever that was. And if you could just mute yourselves, folks. So the criteria discussed kind of depends on, is it, seasonal? It might not always be an average daily flow that they're talking about, because throughout the year, it's a different level of flow, right? So in winter, you're going to see more water. In summer, you're probably going to see less. So they said sometimes some of these bypass flows are going to depend on seasonal changes. Some of them are going to be spontaneous, or, like what happens throughout the day, that sort of thing. I think also I want to talk a little bit about preliminary pulse protection, which is a new phrase that I just learned. But basically, you get more flow, you get more water coming at certain times of year, like the winter, you're going to get allegedly more water coming down because of snow melting. And then there are certain indicators to fish about how they should be behaving. So if they feel a big gush of water and that it's cold, those are kind of, they can't check a calendar and almanac. They don't have little fishy watches. So this cold water and this big gush of it lets them know, oh, hey, it must be February, whatever, time to swim this way. So the pulse protection is kind of, because of that big gush of water, you might also see a big gush of fish or a big school of fish. And then this pulse protection should allegedly kind of help them realize, all these fish are coming, and it's kind of a system of screens and requirements to kind of protect the fish from heading in a dangerous direction. So it's kind of storm-driven flow spikes is what they're calling it, but it's really just fish responding to storms and changes in weather, temperature, things like that. But what I want to know about that, and I think something we'll have to hound them about in the future, is what does that mean if storm indicators can be replicated by the tunnel? And Deirdre, maybe you can answer this if you're still with us. So if the tunnel takes a big chunk of water, a big gush of water, and Deidre, you can answer this later, but is that going to mimic some things that they feel in nature? Are they going to feel like, oh, hey, there's less water here, that must mean it's August or September now? is this, is a diversion of water going to affect what the fish think about the time of year and their habits and their spawning and rearing? That's something I'm hoping someone can kind of explain to us. They kind of gave us different numbers for what would be considered low level pumping. 900 CFS is, at some points they said, across any North Delta intake, that would be their like minimum, like, okay, you can't do any pumping. If it, or you can't go above 900 CFS, so 900 cubic feet per second of pumping if we have below 5,000 CFS of water. But other times we heard them say that, oh, it's a zero. So I think that they're not very clear on that, and it's probably on purpose, and we will have to kind of talk about that a bit more. So let's see, we have, so concerns and solutions. So refugia or refugia, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, sorry about that, is basically like a little fish hotel. So as the fish travel past the screens, it's a little kind of reprieve or refuge for where the fish can just kind of stop, chill out, and be like, whew, that was a big journey. Look around, see if there's more predators, and allegedly it gives them a little break from flow impacts and predators. This is something they've been researching on the Sacramento River, and they're currently being evaluated. So I think that we don't know exactly how great it is. I will definitely want to see pumping minimums. I think that that's one of the biggest things we will all be pushing for, is saying, hey, if there's no water in the river, you can't be pumping it. I think that's a given. So a question that I raised was, what is an acceptable amount of fish that can be sacrificed? And that's something that they were definitely kind of beating around the bush and passing the buck on, unfortunately, saying, well, and I said, if the screens let through a couple of fish and they get sucked up into the pumps, if the screens are not doing their job, how many fish are we going to let die before we decide this isn't a good project anymore? After the state has already dumped $16 to $40 billion in it, are they really going to just stop using this stupid tunnel because some fish are being killed because the tunnel is not a great idea in the first place? You know, what's that threshold? How many fish are we willing to let die? And they said that will really depend on the regulatory agencies, you know, Fish and Wildlife Services. There's like 5 fish monitoring agencies out there. So they're kind of passing the buck on that one, and that's not cool. And I think that's something, another avenue we could go to in terms of adding pressure. Then I think that's something I thought was not cool, and just like, guys, where's your head at? Their take on the tunnel and all of the research they're doing for the EIR is kind of about what is the impact on fish and wildlife that our project is doing. Whereas we enviros are like, hey, what's best for the environment? Not just what damage are you doing by building the tunnel. When we look at all the other things, killing off fish and wildlife, when you add the tunnel to it, then what's happening? As Regina Chichozola said, cumulative effect. So if we've got the tunnel over here, plus the drought, climate change, Klamath River problems, dams, parasites, fires, everything going on, is it like 3 + 3 is 6? Or is it more like 3 × 3 is 9? Is it exponential? Is it growing? Is the effect cumulative? And that's a very serious concern. And I think it's something that data has not really answered quite well enough yet, but hopefully that's something we'll be looking at. And then I think the one you hear us saying all the time would be water and flows. We can't keep putting water in, using our water and letting it flow through these tunnels when we know that it's the biggest indicator of fish health, not habitats, not everything else. The amount of water that is flowing is the biggest indicator, because it's going to flush out yucky stuff in the water. It's going to improve water quality. It's going to improve water salinity, water temperature, water habitat. It's everything that fish need to survive. And then obviously a tunnel just makes all of these things so much worse. So those are our big concerns. I think there was a really good kind of summarizing quote from one of our allies saying that There are already decades worth of research, reports, comments, testimonies. Sufficient environmental review has already been completed. All these agencies, they know what they need to analyze. They have the resources available to do it. And this is a time-sensitive issue. A lot of these species will go extinct this year in 2021 and sometime soon. They should be expediting the process. They all need to really just get through these environmental impact reports, look at everything right now. We need more drought farm restrictions, which may not be popular among a lot of crowds. But we also really, at the end of the day, need to reassess the state's water priorities and the water portfolio, how they work together, how do they work in a drought and in a time when a lot of water agencies, especially around the Delta, especially around the Central Valley, are not managing their water resources well. They're not putting enough water into storage. They're not kind of making the predictions that they need to make given how often droughts occur in California. This poor water management has led to a lot of shutdowns and reductions of fishing for tribes and for everyone. This warming climate, this needs to become a priority when we're looking at water management. So I think that a lot of us know what the solutions are. It's just about enacting it. So let's quickly just talk about some actions. Here is an action coming up from Save California Salmon, and I want to give them major props and shout outs because a lot of the research for this presentation came from Save California Salmon and Golden State Salmon, from the Yurok tribes, from the Winnemem-Wintu tribes, and from Dan Bacher. So thank you to all of those folks here, and DWR. Some of the stuff came from their webinar last night, so thanks for that. But Save California Salmon is having the Love Your River week, and that will be not next week, the week after that. So contact folks here if you want to get involved. It's definitely important. And then you can also take action tomorrow for Trinity and Klamath Rivers. And here's some information. I'll stay on this if you want to do a screenshot. To take a screenshot on a laptop, you press the print screen button at the top row of your keyboard, and then go to wherever you want to put it, like an email, and then you press control, hold the control button down and press V, and voila, you should have a print screen. Also, I will send you the slides and the recording of this. And I can also just send you this particular link if you want to see more information about it. So definitely participate in all of these actions. I think it's also really important to attend the San Francisco PUC and City Council meetings to advocate for salmon and clean water. We're always going to advocate down in the Metropolitan Water District area. Check out buttecreek.org, BUTTE creek.org. And you can donate to the Fish Flow Forever Fund to kind of help out with the Butte Creek situation. And thanks to Dan Bacher for that. I'll send you all that info. We always want to support our allies. They all do an amazing job. We're all in this together, right? And then on the Sierra Club end, we definitely want you to join us for the next DWR webinars. The next one is about, I think, infrastructure. And then the one after that is about, and I could be wrong about that, but then the one after that is about environmental justice. And so that's August 25th, September 16th. We've already sent you plenty of emails about it, and we will send you more. Don't worry, you'll get a reminder. But go to those, listen to what they say, ask your comments. Don't be afraid to be critical. They hate it, so just be extra harsh. And we have a volunteer who lately has been playing clips from different movies, kind of criticizing them. And it's good for a chuckle if you want to do that as well. But also, ask the important questions, say the things that we need to say. So it's important to attend that. And then they are going to write up a frequently asked questions report after the webinar series ends in late September. So you can continue to send them all the questions you want, and I'll send you that email address. It's really just info@DWR. Ask them anything you want to know, any questions you have coming out of this webinar that I can't answer for you, that Deirdre can't answer for you. Send DWR those questions, send them your concerns. at least force them to look at it and attempt to answer it in their FAQs, even if they're not going to do a good job. They should at least be facing these concerns that we have. So send that to them. And then I think obviously the big one though is all of this leads up to the next big vote, which is mid 2022. We don't know exactly when, but that will be the big vote coming after the environmental impact report. So again, if you missed it in the beginning, these webinars are explaining to us, the public, what the topics are that are covered in the environmental impact report on the Delta Tunnel, so that we have an understanding of the things that they're looking at. And then they're not done with that report. They're still working on it. This is really just telling us the things that they're going to look at. And then that'll be in the impact report. And then that report goes to the water agencies for all of them to decide, is this a report that does this mean that we want to continue with the Delta Tunnel or not? And I will say that there were a lot of board members at Metropolitan, and I think Santa Clarita and Santa Clara, that said they really truly didn't know if they wanted to pursue the Delta Tunnel, and that their decision will be based entirely on this environmental impact report. Not everyone out there is terrible and has their heart set on the Delta Tunnel. Some of them were like, we don't know what else to do. Let's see what the impact report says. So if this environmental impact report says, hey, this is a terrible thing, then we can highlight to them, this is a terrible thing, don't do it. And we just need to make that very, very clear for them that we don't want this stupid thing. Read the report, we'll tell you what it means. So that's going to be really, really critical next year. And that's what we're doing now, just getting ready for that, getting the word out there, getting more folks to learn about it. So that means talk about the tunnel with your friends, send them to me if they've got specific questions, bring your friends to our Wednesday meetings. And then we are also going to be doing campus recruitment. Right now with the Delta variant, I am getting a little nervous about sending folks out there. So I will continue to send you the volunteer sign up form. So at least if you're interested, we've got your information, and then we'll just see what happens with the Delta variant as colleges go back into session over the next few months. We'll think about it. We wouldn't send you anywhere dangerous, but we'll think about it. So it couldn't hurt to sign up. So those are the actions that we would love to see you take. I think now we are going to open it up to Q&A. I am going to keep the recording going because there's always some awesome questions, but I'm going to stop sharing, and thank you.
Can we get it to Deidre?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Gary.
I'm just saying, if Deidre can speak while she's still with us.
Yep. Deidre, if you have anything you want to say, and then I'm going to look through the
yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just really not feeling very well, which is why I wasn't on the call at 6. So first is appropriate delta flow criteria. What we really want the water board to do is to determine appropriate delta flow criteria and put it in the permit. The problem is that what DWR is proposing is probably going to be an Endangered Species Act regulation from Fish and Wildlife. What happened with the Trump biological opinion? I mean, they just gutted the protections, and the water board assumed in 1995 the current water quality protections weren't just the only baseline. There was also Endangered Species Act protections, and there was 2 environmental water accounts, one of which was reclamations, and they all the huge environmental water budget. It was like 800,000 acre feet. Poof, it all vanished. And the Endangered Species Act just got it during the Trump administration. And somebody said on Twitter, they're operating to their permit. I testified in the water board hearing. This needs to go into the permit, and it's actually law. It's required in law by the Delta Reform Act. So when you talk about minimum bypass criteria, when I looked at the history, the only thing that's consistently been enforced is hard minimum bypass laws. And, you know, and if we put those in there, the tunnel will yield less water and they'll get less interested in it, because if you put hard minimum bypass flows, that will help fish. And the other thing is, let's not rely on the water quality control plan update, because right now it's all voluntary agreements, and that's going to do nothing for. And the other thing is, the water quality control plan, existing requirements never envisioned a delta tunnel. And in fact, Felicia Marcus was administrator of the EPA at that time. And she said, if some new configuration of diversions, like, North Delta intakes, you would have to go back and look at it. And just the minimum flows they have are not designed for North Delta diversions. They need bypass flows in the Sacramento River, and they need more monitoring. So that's one point.
Deidre, do you
The
have
other
any
one is
suggestions
these
on?
two, and
Do you have any suggestions on what those hard minimum bypass flows should be? Is it too early to tell? Do you have a suggested number?
yeah, no, there's some very good research. So the NOAA Fisheries, Southwest Fisheries office is in Santa Cruz, and Jeremy Notch came out with a good study of pulse flows. But we need to get beyond pulse flows for salmon, because salmon might not be there. And there's a whole lot of other beneficial uses. So that's a whole another subject, but I will tell you that 5,000 CFS is not enough for minimum bypass flows. And in fact, USGS did some preliminary study and found out it should probably be about 10,000 CFS. To maintain, the other thing is there's a sweeping velocity as fish swim downstream. You want to have a velocity pulling the fish downstream, because you got the tunnel, sucking them in. And if they're not swept downstream enough, so 0.4 of a foot per second is kind of minimum. But the problem is at 5,000 CFS, they only are achieving that minimum for half the tidal cycle. And half the time the sweeping velocity is less. And that's why I said, when are you going to put a flow sensor at Hood? Because the only data they have is from 1982 in the peripheral canal, and I dug it up out of the state library. So really it points to, and there's not just salmon, sturgeon or baby sturgeon are much worse swimmers, but there's just more an issue of maintaining, the health of the estuary downstream. And the problem is really not just the tunnel, but the tunnel in combination with sites, because sites is like 3750 or something. And so when they're taking 6,000 CFS at the North Delta diversions and another almost 4,000 CFS upstream for sites, that's the equivalent of the old project. So, so it's something they need to look at, and they're also piecemealing these projects, and they're not looking at the whole thing cumulatively. Ron Stork testified that they needed to do that in the last hearing. And then the other thing is these intakes, these enormous 3,000 CFS intakes. I have fought for that. So the history is they convened a bunch of fish biologists from the fish agencies in a room with Tina Swanson from NRDC and the Gwen Buchholz and the tunnel, the tunnel proponents, and said, hey, well, what do you think? And they hadn't done any studies. And they said, well, we think maybe the biggest you could possibly do is 3,000 CFS. So they had, oh, okay, all of the intakes will be 3,000 CFS. And they defined this 5 intake monster that was going to be up to 15,000 CFS, was going to be capable of taking the entire average flow of the Sacramento River. And as you see, it's kept downsizing, but they kept this enormous intake size. And Dave Vogel, who's a big fish screen expert, has said it's just going to be catastrophic for salmon. And when I asked them at the hearing, at the seminar, and I said, and I said, what process? They told the committee, oh, Fish and Wildlife has said it's 3,000 CFS and we're not changing it. And I said, what process was that? Because there was no incidental take permit, there was no consultation. And so then they changed it and said, oh, it's DWR. DWR specified it. And this may be legally quite useful because, oh, it's based on the old project. So they just carried it over with the old project. And then what's his name said, oh, well, if I put these giant 3,000 CFS intakes between Clarksburg and Cortland, there's not that many places to put them. And I'm like, well, shit, yes. So the 3 water fix intakes were the best sites. And he got this sly smile on his face when he was presenting to the SEC. Yeah, the water fix intakes were the best sites. Smile. And I'm like, oh, you know, they didn't relook at anything. And then they told the stakeholder engagement committee members, they told Barbara, Barry, and Perea, you got to pick 2 out of the 3 sites. And Barbara's like, I got her email. I PRA'd her email, and she's like, I don't think I want to do this. You know, in a lot of, most of the stakeholder engagement committee members refused to pick 2 out of the 3 sites, but that was how they came up with these intake sites. And it was just totally bogus. It'll be horrible for the legacy towns as well as catastrophic for salmon. And what they did is they changed the screen type. They changed from flat plate screens to these cylindrical screens, which is, I'm just like, I'm sorry, you know, it's not going to, it's just, you know, that's not going to fix the issue of these enormous intakes. So, you know, so it's been a sham process and it was very flawed. There was studies that they needed to do of those intakes. They needed to take flow data where they were going to put it because they don't have a sensor at Hood. There's one at Freeport, and then there's one, I pulled the data from the nearest downstream sensor, but it's miles downstream. And the only flow data is from 1982, and I do have that. But they need to do, it's called, they need to do a field study to validate the models and make sure it, and they are doing the 2D hydraulic modeling, but that's it. They haven't done the field studies. And in 2011, the fish facilities technical team, which was people from the various fish agencies, said, you have to do this. You need to do this. It'll take 6 to 12 months. And they're not doing it because they know on some level it's not going to look good. But, you know, I'm concerned they're this far along and they've got a preliminary engineer. I mean, just because the EIR hasn't come out, it's an enormous project. And they've got 3 preliminary engineering designs and they've spent all their money for preliminary engineering for those. And they're just looking at minor changes at this point. And they never, I met with them in June of 2019 and said, look, you've got to do the studies. The other thing is likely those intakes aren't far enough north. If you're really worried about high sea level rise, and given what happened with the extreme temperature changes, which aren't something that was predicted until the latter half of the century, I mean, we may be seeing accelerated feedback loops with climate change. So if you're really seriously looking at this as, you know, an adaptation to sea level rise that's going to last past 2080, then, you know, then you've got to look at that seriously. And supposedly they're doing that modeling, but they're not showing it to anybody. And what I see is they just, you know, that they wanted to, Gwen Buchholz in September 2019, Gwen Buchholz looked at the locations for the intakes and said, you know, no, it's fine. We're going to leave them there. And she was very heavily invested in, I'd met with them in June and I said, you need to do it. And she's like, we're not looking at changing the intake locations. And we did submit comments saying, look at intakes that are half the size. And I worked with Angelica Whaley from Hood, and she was on the stakeholder engagement committee, and she asked, as the North Delta Business Representative, look for intakes that are half the size. And CSPA said that too. Look at intakes that are half the size. You have more flexibility about where you put them. It would be a much smaller project and it wouldn't destroy fish. So I think it's something to bring up with Adele Hagfield. This is not a science-based project. It's just not. It's hype. It's a boondoggle. And the governor and Wade Crowfoot, the governor directed that the project be changed to limit impacts on Delta legacy communities and fish. And they didn't do that. I mean, I was in the office and I went through and I noticed in June 2019, they had these maps up and they had approved project and proposed project. And the proposed project was a single tunnel in the water fix footprint. And I was going to sneak a picture on the way out, and I must have muttered something to myself. And Gwen Buchholz said, wait here. And then all the maps, every single one of them was down. And so I had no evidence, but I can tell you, that's what they were doing. May 2019, the governor rescinded all proposals, and that's what they were all doing. And they were all furiously working. I saw them in my office. So, this is a warmed over water fix project. I even though they're looking at an eastern corridor, I strongly suspect because Met bought those islands, that it will be a single tunnel in the water fix footprint. And basically what they did, they spent a lot of time there. They put in access roads so that traffic isn't going to be quite so horrendous. But even the tunneling contractors, in December of 2019, Catherine Mallon convened, took the old water fix project footprints and was like, we're going to do 2 intakes and a single tunnel in the water fix footprint. And, and let us know how you would bid on this project, and convened a meeting with tunnel contractors. And they said, we couldn't bid on this. There's no access. And if you did build all the roads, it would cost as much as moving it to the east. But I'm not convinced that even the eastern route is being that seriously considered, although supposedly it's the preferred project for the Army Corps permit. And the other issue is the Army Corps permit. There's a real issue that the federal EIS isn't considering anything except construction impacts. And it should be considered. The reason they got away with that was it was the Trump administration. It really should be considering flows and flow impacts as well. And I think there's 2 processes that are missing. One is a process to determine appropriate delta flow criteria. And that is in the Delta Reform Act, and the Water Board needs to be involved in that. And the other is for the federal agencies to look at and approve delta flow criteria. So I think those are both incredibly important. I don't think with the Design and Construction Authority, I mean, I fought those guys in the water fix hearing hard enough that they told me, one of the attorneys told me, Deirdre, I'm surprised you're still alive and they haven't found you in your body in a hotel room somewhere. But, he was only half joking. But, they're just so set in their ways. They're not going to change. They're not going to re-envision this process. And I think getting Adele is probably the most promising thing. And I think getting it somehow, I mean, they're very far down the tracks with the engineering. So it's really an issue. And I did work with groups to object in June 2019 with the DCA rushing forward with the engineering design, but nobody wanted to sue at that point. And so this is what we're stuck with is, water fix light. And it is horrendous for fish.
Oh, wow. Well, that's terrible. But also we're recording this and putting on our website. So if anyone comes after you, we got you. Goodness. Okay. Does anyone have any questions that they just want to raise their hand for as I go through the chat, and Deirdre and I can answer these? Deirdre, if you can just hang on and see if we can, in case there's stuff that only you can answer. Gary made a really good point that salmon live for only 3 years and return to their birthplace to spawn in their 3rd year. So 3 disastrous years in a row can make the salmon go extinct. There are 4 separate runs of salmon each year, and each is genetically adapted to their conditions. So if the salmon in any of these 4 runs go extinct, then their genetic diversity is lost forever.
The guy who left, Lionel Morris, asked a related question about, do the biologists save the DNA that it can be used? I have a tentative answer, which is that maybe they do. But the fact is that once the salmon are gone, then our political leverage is reduced, and we have to protect them while they're still there for that reason.
I just wanted to say, I'm very concerned if the salmon do go extinct, all of the bypass flow requirements for all of the dams on the Sacramento River are for salmon.
You mean that all the calculations are designed for salmon alone and not for the other endangered fish?
It's not just the calculations. I mean, somebody's going to have to go in and make an argument that if the salmon do go extinct, even though salmon are extinct, we still need these bypass flows for other species and other beneficial uses. And Delta smelt are going extinct too. You know, so some of these iconic species that the Delta has been managed for, I did actually make a comment for biological goals and objectives. I said, for the Delta, you need to manage for the pelagic ensemble of fish. And the pelagic ensemble includes not just Delta smelt and longfin smelt, which are also not in a good shape, but non-native species, including American shad, striped bass, and threadfin shad that also occupy this pelagic or open water niche. And that was also recognized by scientists on this panel. But right now we're set up to manage for, you know, single species, like all of the pumping requirements are for Delta smelt, and people are already pushing to have them declared extinct. So.
Thanks for that, Deidre. There's a question, what is the state's explanation as to why we need the Delta tunnel? And you've heard the claim that they'll prevent fish from being sucked into the pumps. I mean, the cylindrical T-shaped screens that we just looked at was their attempt at preventing them from being sucked into the pumps. And when I said, does that mean that nobody's going to get sucked into the pump? They couldn't prove that. They know that there will be some fish that do get sucked up. And that's what I was talking about with what is the amount that they are comfortable with.
Is that the real reason for this massive multi-billion-dollar project?
No, that's not the reason for the tunnel. Just to your question about the will the fish get sucked into the pumps? They know that some will get sucked into the pumps. They're just passing the buck on what is the acceptable level of fish getting sucked into the pumps.
Right.
Which, if these are endangered species, it should be 0. But why they think we need the Delta tunnel is they're saying there's just not enough water for all the people and farms and everything else that needs it, that we don't have enough of a reliable water source, given the size and everything. And then they also think that the tunnel is, well, I'll take it one at a time. So we say to that end, there are plenty of other sources of water. If we focused more on regional local sourcing, water recycling, stormwater capture, gray water, all the things we're always pushing for, it wouldn't be as much of an issue. They say that the Delta tunnel isn't going to, they know it's not going to produce a new source of water. They think it's just about reliability. And I think that's not necessarily, so I'm just trying to mute folks. They think that they can say the tunnel will be about reliability, but we know that's not true because it's not a new water source, because the water is coming from the Sierra snowmelt, and that's not going to be there in the future as climate change just heats everything up. That's just not gonna, it's not gonna happen. They also say that that we need the tunnel because of seismic activity, and even if the area, sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Even if the area where the tunnel is built is seismically resilient, there are hundreds of miles of pipeline. Sorry, I'm gonna mute everyone else. That there is hundreds of miles of pipeline along the way over other faults. So the water's still gonna spill out somewhere. We're still gonna have 6 months to 3 years of backups or of wait times to get that water from the Delta down to places further south, if that were the case. So they really can't make that seismic activity argument. And then their other one is water salinity and sea level rise. Okay, that's just not true, because we need that fresh water pushing out the salt water for that to really make sense. So whatever their saltwater argument is, it's not accurate. I think at the end of the day, this benefits farmers, and it's a legacy project for a lot of folks. And that's really what this is about.
So Katie, just to summarize, because that was really helpful. It appears, okay, so as I mentioned in the chat, I heard Tom Birmingham, the general manager of the Westlands Water, for the initial phase of the Delta tunnels in 2015, tell his board of directors, I guarantee you that if this project goes, it will mean more water for farms than we have presently, less flow through the Delta. So that raises the obvious question, can the fish handle any less water than is currently being delivered? And that seems to be the starting point, and everything else to me is smoke and mirrors.
Without numbers in front of me, my guess is just no. And I think it depends on, how much. I think we would have to know exactly how much water is flowing through. No one will say exactly how much water the tunnel will be used to pump out. No one will say how much water is going to go to Met or any specific water agency. They all say, oh, well, we can't give you a number every year because it depends on dry years, wet years, water conditions. And, if they actually stuck to that, that would be like one small good thing. But I think it's just not reliable. We can't trust that they wouldn't continue pumping even when we're below that 5,000 CFS or whatever the flow is. I just don't trust them to actually stick to that. So there's really no way of knowing how much water they would actually pump out. And so it would be hard to kind of put a number on that, because they're going to say they're doing the right thing and that they wouldn't pump the water if there wasn't water to pump. We know that's not true, but without them like really truly admitting it, then it's hard to kind of do projections and studies based on that, if that makes sense.
I'll say just one more thing out of light humor. Lecturer in law school gave a great lecture about how car salesmen can, say, oh, this is a Jim Dandy car. It's really hot. It's great. And all that's puffery and can't be sued on. But if they tell you this car does 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, then you can sue them. Well, what I hear is a lot of puffery. I hear no accountability. And if I ask what does the car do in miles per in 0 to 60, there is a number, and the engineers can tell us what it is. But here we're hearing no numbers, right?
I really like that. That's a really good point. I'm going to bring that up with some people because I like your lawyer brain.
If I could make an observation about operations during really critically dry years like this, it became really obvious to me. There was a lot of questions about how they would operate, but I am sure that they will just want to switch entirely to the North Delta diversions in a year like this and let the South Delta just get sailing. And actually that'll screw the Central Valley project as well as Delta farmers and be catastrophic for Delta fish. But they wouldn't have to do this. They said in their last, as far as climate change, it would be easier to defend from salinity intrusion. And I know we all know what that means. We just switch and yeah, you could take more water from the Sacramento River. But it would deprive the entire delta, an entire area of origin, of all beneficial uses, fish, delta farms, and delta cities like Antioch and Brentwood and little delta legacy towns. And it would make the groundwater wells that serve, the little marinas and stuff, go saline as well. So bad.
Yeah, thanks, Deidre. You're right. Lionel says he thinks that the state should focus on natural water preservation and underground water storage. Yeah, we definitely need to fix our storage capacities all over the state. I think there's still the concern of, finding the water to put it there in the first place. And Sierra Club, we're always going to push for recycled water, brackish desalination, gray water, stormwater capture, and conservation as well. So, and I think that we're kind of getting there. And yes, we absolutely need to focus on focusing on the environment and minimal damage and mitigation. Although I should say, to the end of mitigation, in terms of the Delta Tunnel, no mitigation, just no tunnel. We're not going to back down on that one. Independent scientists. So that's a good question. Lionel asked, did the state hire independent scientists to study the impact of the tunnel? Kind of, sort of, but Deirdre, do you want to talk about the independent?
Yeah, that's part of the reason that I'm fighting so hard for funding for the Independent Science Board is they sent a letter. So the Independent Science Board in the Delta Reform Act, it mandated that the DWR shall consult about the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. The problem is, Delta Reform Act was passed in 2009, and the Bay Delta Conservation Plan had a tunnel in it, and the other part was this huge federal habitat conservation plan under the Federal Endangered Species Act, a Section 10 consultation. And that part just went away. And so now there's no mandate for the DWR to consult the Independent Science Board, and they have not been, even though the Independent Science Board sent a letter saying, we plan to exercise rigorous scientific review over, adaptive management, and they had some really good critical things to say about that, and also over climate change. And the Delta Independent impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, floods, et cetera. And they said, if it's not adequately considered, you can't assume that the project is going to have these kind of benefits. And DWR just blew them off. And it was based in part on my testimony about sea level rise, that the Delta Stewardship Council has to have a finding that DWR used best available science, the tunnel, and part of that is going to be the Independent Science Board review. So that's why the Independent Science Board review is so critical, because right now what the Design and Construction Authority is doing is they're hiring panels of technical experts, many of whom are like people who testified for the state water contractor, well, for DWR, but were hired by the state water contractors and testified for DWR in the water fix hearing. And I'm like, those aren't independent. And they're just like, oh yeah, your intakes look great. When they did get a result they didn't like, where the tunnel contractor said the central corridor won't work, look at, just don't study that anymore. They convened another panel. And we don't know about these panels except, we get a report. There's no notice of when they are. They're not publicly noticed. Nobody else can review the information. Nobody else can participate. And unfortunately, it's not required. That the Delta current definition of best available science doesn't require that the panels they convene even be publicly noticed. It just recommends it. So we really, really need the Independent Science Board review, where I consider those panels to just be, there is some good information they're getting, but it's really not a rigorous independent review by any stretch of the imagination.
Ron Martin said something about other countries needing more trail mix. I think that just the backstory behind that is that a lot of the water that we use in California is for almonds and pistachios and other things like that. And if you think about it in that sense, our water in California is being used to grow these almonds and pistachios and other things. 90% of California's almonds are exported around the world. So in a lot of ways, we're using our water, giving it away to other countries around the world so that a handful of farmers can make a ton of money off of this. So very frustrating. Do we have any more questions or comments before we wrap up? Okay, so if you think of anything, my email is caty.wagner@Sierra Club. You should all have that, I think. We also have our Facebook group, Stop the Delta Tunnel. You can ask questions in there. This recording will go on our website, and I'll send you the link to that. And I'll send you I would send you the recording, but this is going to be a very big file. So I'll send you the links and then any other actions that were mentioned out to our group. So thanks everyone for participating, and have a good night, and we will see you sometime soon. Deidre, thank you so much for all of your help and amazing info, and we hope you feel better. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah.
Have a good one, everyone.
Too. Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Bye, everybody.